Today on the Milk Making Minutes, you will hear a story of what happens far too often when there's too little support too late. My friend Elyse tells a story of struggling to breastfeed her second baby and waiting over 3 months to see a lactation consultant. As you listen, think about the support you received. Was it enough? She also shares a story of a culture clash with her own family that made breastfeeding more challenging. How does this compare to your own situation? Enjoy Elise's honest story of breastfeeding her 2 babies. Feeding our babies is supposed to come naturally. We see images of cooing babies and smiling moms and doting grandmas and expect that to be us. We don't see all the struggle that goes into every decision that seems so high stakes at the time. We don't expect all the leaking, the engorgement, the deciding to take a break. We don't expect all the judgment, whether we breastfeed or bottle feed or pump or don't. Or maybe we do expect all those things and it comes smooth sailing. But what I have encountered as a doula, a childbirth educator, and a lactation professional is that when I tell people what I do, the stories flow out naturally. And I love hearing them. I hope you do too. I'm your host, Lo. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. Hi, Elyse. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Lo. I'm too. It's been a while.
I know. You're a real life friend from many years ago.
Don't
15.
add a number.
Yeah, I know. It's been too long. And we have not talked about your baby feeding stories, not really. So I'm really happy to have you on the podcast. So before we get into it, why don't you introduce your family?
Well, I have 2 little ones. They're not so little. They're giants. Now, I have Dean, who is my oldest, who has always been a giant. And then Amelia, he's 7 now, and Amelia, who is 5 now, and she was my littlest but even then she still was the biggest baby the nurses have seen, even though she was way smaller for me.
Smaller than Dean.
Okay. Smaller than Dean. But yeah, I have bred them large.
Yes. Great. So what was your exposure to breastfeeding before you were pregnant and making decisions about feeding your babies?
Before I ever actually thought about having kids, I kind of assumed I would just use formula because that was my exposure. That was what I thought was done. Then when I started looking into having kids and I went through what I call my hippie days affectionately, what got into a way more natural way of living, I didn't even think about using formula. Like, why would I do that? So then I thought, of course I'm going to breastfeed. And I didn't even consider that would be an issue. Luckily with my son, it wasn't an issue. With my daughter, That's a different story.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So when you say that you just thought you would formula feed because that's what you were exposed to, does that mean that was the history in your family? That's what you had seen friends do?
That's what I had seen people around me do, people I had grown up with around. I have a younger cousin. She's 7, 8 years younger than me. And so I remember when she was born and I helped do all the things to take care of her. And I was old enough to be able to help care for her then. And I remember she was formula fed. And looking back now, I know that was probably due to her mom's job. She had a very important banking job, and probably due to just the stress of her mom's relationship as well. But I didn't know any of that at the time because I was 7, 8 years old. And then as I grew up babysitting kids, it was always formula that I was providing for these babies when I was babysitting. It wasn't breast milk out of the bag or anything. It was just a couple scoops and then, feed them and put them to bed. Okay. So I knew what to do with formula.
Right. And did you have any conversations with your own mom when you were pregnant and thinking about these decisions?
Once I was pregnant, then we actually started having those conversations, and I had conversations with my mom, with that older cousin aunt who had my younger cousin, and all the other women in my family about their experiences, because everybody wants to tell you their own horror story, right?
Yeah.
When they
Right.
give
That's
birth.
true.
And so I had asked a lot about breastfeeding, and my mom said, with me, it was really easy to breastfeed me, but it just wasn't done. That wasn't the practice. Everybody pushed formula. So she used formula. Even though she could breastfeed, she didn't.
And you're in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Oklahoma. And I guess because it was the 80s, I think it was part of that consumerism mentality as well.
And also probably a little bit of, being conservative and not showing your breasts probably was part of that.
And when I was breastfeeding, my mom had a big issue that I was not concerned with or worried about having to cover up. She's like, you need to cover. It's like, why? She was very, very concerned about that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And was she ever concerned wearing bikinis or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So that went hand in hand.
As I was growing up, it wasn't ever about two pieces. I was always allowed to wear a two-piece. But as I started gaining weight in my 20s, and then further into my 30s, and then now after I have my mom bod and the fupa, and, she still makes that comment of, well, you can't wear the two-piece anymore. I'm like, I'm going to wear the two-piece. I'm going to wear what's comfortable. I don't care. I can move in this. I don't feel like something's going to fall out because it doesn't fit right and trying to hide something but isn't. And there's very much a disconnect in our two ideas of what's acceptable body-wise.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that really plays into breastfeeding. And I think it makes it really hard for a lot of people who are the first in their families. There's a lot of pressure to cover up. Then when you're trying to feed your baby and your baby doesn't want to be covered and you're at a family function or your baby is fussy. And for you might have been like, I don't care. I'm going to feed my baby. It doesn't matter. But for other people, that could be really anxiety causing.
Oh, yeah. I would end up just having to go to another room and missed out on a whole bunch of family stuff because I just didn't want to have the fight.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It did affect you. Even though you are a very strong person and have lots of strong opinions, you still decided it wasn't worth the fight and you went off into another place.
And so I remember a family Christmas where I just went to another room, which most of our houses are fairly open spaces. And so the rooms aren't quite closed off or delineated. And so I just went to a different corner of the space. And most of my younger cousins who were in their early to mid 20s when I was breastfeeding him, they would just come and follow me and were just chilling and talking to me, even though they were supposed to be playing this game over. I had to leave the game to go feed my child. And they're like, why aren't you playing the game? Well, because we want to talk to her and she's in here.
Yeah, that's so challenging. Did that culture ever change? Do you feel like it shifted at all throughout the course of your breastfeeding, Dean, or did it stay the same?
It stayed pretty much the same. Things shifted just a little bit because of the seasons, like the weather seasons, not necessarily the seasons of our breastfeeding journey. And so if it was hot and I was going to be showing more skin anyway, then it wasn't that big a deal for me to just whip a boob out and feed him. It was less of a concern.
Wow, I was thinking the opposite, that if you were like more covered up already because you have so many layers, it would be hard to see your breasts, so nobody would even notice. But you're saying the opposite, that if you were already showing so much skin, nobody even cared.
Yeah. Well, because I had so many layers on, it was obvious that I had to take the layers off to get to the boob.
Right.
So, but if I didn't have that many layers on, I was able to just kind of do a tiny little shift to whip the boob out. It was less conspicuous, I guess.
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. That sounds really
Yeah.
stressful. Yeah.
Then attitudes didn't really shift with my daughter because I had a much harder time breastfeeding with her.
So when you're stressed out about breastfeeding, it's already hard. And so then when the people around you aren't being supportive, it makes it even more challenging to readjust the latch, try to make it
Mhm.
work, try to, sometimes you might have to expose yourself more if things
Right.
aren't working well. And so if you're not in a place where you can really do that and try to figure it out, then you might not be able to make it work. I was curious about the role Elisa's husband, who is a family physician, played in advocating for her wishes as she navigated this difficult situation with her family. She told me he did step in and say that Elyse was doing what she needed to do to feed her baby, but mostly allowed her to take the lead with her relationship with her family. She felt very supported by him in general. They both approached breastfeeding with a hopeful attitude, but knew they would do whatever they needed to do to feed the baby. She did have hopes of breastfeeding for a year, and she told me this when I asked about her breastfeeding goals. As you listen, think about goals you set for yourself and the adjustments you made along the way. Did you feel supported to meet your goals? If not, what would have helped you to feel more supported?
I wanted to breastfeed for at least a year
Mm-hmm.
with both of them. Did not make it with either
Mm-hmm.
of them.
Mm-hmm.
With Dean, we did make it to 10 months,
Mm-hmm.
but he was such a voracious eater. Still is. The boy loves his groceries.
So you made it to the 10 months with Dean, and then for Amelia, you thought, okay, I'm going to try again for a year.
Yeah, Amelia was
And
a whole different ballgame.
I can't wait to hear about it. So, was there anything that happened at either one of their births that you think shaped, that impacted your breastfeeding journey?
I don't think so. Dean was born Frank Breech. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to do everything completely natural, no painkillers, no epidural, nothing with Dean. And then we
Mm-hmm.
learned he was Frank Breech. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had to go in with a C-section with him. And it
Yeah.
wasn't an emergency C-section. We had to schedule one because they couldn't turn him in time. He was too large. Dean ended up being 10 pounds, 3 ounces
Mm-hmm.
when he was born.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then because he was born C-section, there's not, when we moved back to Oklahoma, I was pregnant with Amelia, and there is not a doctor in Oklahoma that will do a VBAC.
Wow.
Yeah,
Not a
we,
one.
not one.
Wow.
I take that back. I think there might be one in Tulsa, and
Okay.
we are not in Tulsa. We are
Right.
easily an hour and a half away.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that's not a good range to be for that to be your birth doctor,
Yeah. So
right? To be your deliverer.
Frank Breach presentation means butt is down, feet are straight in the air, head is up.
Right.
Okay. So C-section, and then
So
how long after C-section, after the C-section with both babies, did your milk come in? Do you remember?
with Dean, it was right away.
Okay. So that
And
wasn't really a
to
problem.
prep
And how close to your due date was that C-section?
with Dean, we were only a week early, and from the due date, and I really think he started to come. We actually ended up going into what I guess would be an emergency C-section 2 days before the scheduled C-section, like because of some preeclampsia symptoms.
Okay.
He wanted to come early. I mean, he was so large, he was ready. He was
Okay.
cooked.
Yeah. So you ended up going in early, 2 days before that C-section was
Yeah.
scheduled. But then your milk came in. When you say right away, do you mean like 1 day, 2 days, 3 days?
The first time that they brought him to me to feed, I already
Mm-hmm.
had the colostrum ready to go. Like it was already nursing. He was already feeding. The time that they brought him to me to feed before we left the hospital, I already had let down. Before we ever
Mm-hmm.
left the hospital, I was already nursing
Okay.
him strong.
Okay, so your mature milk came in before you even, and you were in the hospital 3 days or 5 days with a C-section?
2 nights, maybe.
Oh, that's
May
it? Wow.
maybe. Yeah.
So 2 nights. So before you left, your mature milk had come in with him. Were you
I don't
did you
I
get
don't
to
think my
hold him right
mature
away?
milk. Oh, yeah. I don't think
Okay.
my mature milk came in until we were home. It was still the colostrum.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, as soon as he was out, as soon as they got him out of all of the goo, like he was still gooey and waxy, and they put him on my chest,
Okay.
even in the OR. Will got to, they took him from me. Like we have a picture in the OR that's really precious to me. Will trying to squat down right next to us, and I'm bawling and holding him, and
Oh.
then Will takes him away, and Will gets to be the one to start to wrap him up and cut
Uh-huh.
things. And, because at that point, Will had delivered, I don't know, 100 babies himself.
Right. Yeah.
He'd
Uh-huh.
done the operation. So it was really special to him,
Yeah, of
especially because
course.
everybody in that room with him, he had worked with
Right.
for a year and a half already.
Yeah. Okay. So, so he got to do all of that, and then how quickly after that was baby brought back to you?
Pretty immediately.
Okay.
They let me hold him on the bed, and while they wheeled me back to our room.
Okay. And you said he was a voracious nurser from the very beginning.
Absolutely voracious.
Okay.
Every 2.5 hours on the dot, and he was eating the max that he could possibly get out of me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you weren't in any pain or anything at the
No,
beginning?
one of the mommy blogs that I had read had mentioned pineapples and pineapple juice, and I took that to heart. And so starting at 32, 34 weeks pregnant, I started drinking a can of pineapple juice a day. And because pineapples are bromelade, it has natural anti-inflammatory properties. And I never had any letdown pain at all whatsoever. It also, affects the taste of your milk, but I guess Dean seemed to love it. I had absolutely no issues, no pain. I had a little bit of, cracked nipples at the beginning, but not near what I experienced with Amelia.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was due to the pineapple juice.
So did you, yeah, so tell me what happened at Amelia's birth. So she was a scheduled C-section.
So Amelia
Um,
had to be a scheduled C-section also, and
mhm.
we ended up going to the ER about 3 days before her scheduled C-section also. She was ready to come out. During the birth, the doctor was very understanding how much I really wanted to do the VBAC also, but her hands were tied by her hospital higher ups. And so she made everything as contact as possible.
Mhm.
So, same thing, I got to hold her immediately as soon as she came out. And then, because Will is an attending with that hospital system, he was able to do all the same things in the OR.
Mhm.
And then they didn't let me hold her as they wheeled us back to the room.
Mhm.
But as soon as we got back to the room, like it was full contact immediately as soon as we could. We tried to nurse, and we were able to
Mhm.
get some, but Amelia was tongue tied.
Okay. I
So,
was wondering.
yeah, Amelia was tongue tied, and the nursing staff there was not very supportive at all. It was immediately, here, we'll just get some formula in her, instead of let's see what we can do to try and find a better latch. That was not helpful, not supportive. And I was very
Yeah.
adamant, no, we can nurse. I know I can nurse a child because I've done it. Look how large this kid is.
Mhm. Right. But they were pretty insistent.
They were insistent. Well, she just needs to be fed.
Mhm.
You're right. fed is best. I'm not going to argue that point. However, I know I can breastfeed a child.
Right. And also, when you start to feed formula instead of feeding at the breast, it does impact your milk supply. So it has
Exactly.
repercussions down the line. So, yes, fed is
Especially on day
best.
one.
Right. But if somebody wants to breastfeed, you have to do everything you can to help them breastfeed.
Mm-hmm.
While, if you need to feed a little syringe of formula or give them a little spoonful, or you can do things like hand express colostrum and give that to them in a little syringe. There are things you can do if you have a knowledgeable breastfeeding supporter that
Yeah,
is feeding the baby. That's not just, let's just give a bottle of formula, that's also protecting the mother's milk supply.
exactly. So I was
It
trying
doesn't have
to
to be one or the other.
hand express, I was trying to pump, I was trying everything that I knew how to do so I could keep my supply going so I could
Mm-hmm.
feed her. And then they had a breastfeeding consultant.
Mm-hmm.
However, she wasn't going to be in until Monday, and we had her on a Friday. We would,
Mm.
and we were already checked out on Sunday.
Wow, that is a short stay for a C-section. Was that your choice or that was the hospital policy?
That was hospital policy. Or
Wow.
rather, I believe it's insurance policy, but
Insurance policy, right. Yeah. And also, waiting 2 or 3 days for a lactation visit
mhm,
is a long time when you have a teeny tiny baby that needs to be
yeah,
fed. Yeah. If a hospital, that's one thing that people can check. How many lactation consultants do you have on staff? What are their shifts? Do you
mhm.
have somebody who comes every single day, or do they just work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5?
Exactly, because babies don't wait 9 to 5 Monday
Exactly.
through Friday.
Right. Yeah. So it's not helpful if it's just one person. And depending on the size of the hospital and how many babies are being born, that one person might not be able to help everybody who needs help. And in that case, there are things you can do. You can have somebody, depending on your financial resources, because that's a whole nother story, or what your insurance covers, you could have somebody lined up that you're going to call, that you're hiring privately or having your insurance pay for separately, that will come. But you don't know until you know, right? That you're in this
Exactly.
situation.
You
Right.
can't set it up beforehand because you don't know until you need it.
Exactly.
That is extremely frustrating for me as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It took us 3 months to figure out that's what the issue was, trying to nurse her, that she had a tongue tie. It took us that long to be able to get in to see the lactation specialist.
How long?
To 3 months
Wow. In a hospital system?
in the hospital system.
Wow.
Yeah, I think she was 3 months and a week old when she had the surgery to fix the tongue tie.
Mm. Where did you go to get it fixed? Was it a dentist office or?
Yeah, it was a specialty dentist office who's in the same general area as where we had Amelia.
Mm-hmm.
And turns out I have a friend who I grew up with whose son is around the same age as Amelia. I have a couple cousins who have kids around the same age as Amelia, and they all had their babies in the same system that I had Amelia. And they went through the exact same thing regarding
Wow.
breastfeeding, tongue ties, and having to wait until they were about 3 months
So what
to
did you
find
do
out.
in those 3 months?
Struggled. I tried my best to pump and ended up pouring it straight into the bottle and getting that bottle to her. But
Uh-huh.
I had a 2-year-old at home
Right.
also. And
Right.
so, and I didn't have a mobile pump that was on a battery pack that I could walk around and pump. I was
Mm-hmm.
chained to a wall pumping, and then I had to feed her. And so I had a 2-year-old that I was letting Daniel Tiger babysit for that
Mm-hmm.
hour. That wasn't going to work, and did 3 months of that.
Yeah. And so she was not latching at all?
She was struggling to latch. She was trying to, and
Uh-huh.
she just could not get a good latch. Like
Okay.
my breast would be this huge mess
Uh-huh.
because she could get something out, but she couldn't latch to get it in.
Okay.
when she would try to latch, was it painful for you?
Oh, extremely painful.
Okay.
I
So it was like
I had
toe curling, tears.
Yeah, I had the worst cracked nipples because everything was just this wet mess, and it felt like she was just biting and chewing and gnawing without any teeth. And
And
I
did you already know that she had a tongue tie, or
no.
were you okay? So she couldn't latch. You didn't know why. You were trying to be seen by a lactation specialist.
Yeah.
But there was an over 3 month long wait list. So you had no idea why. Had you heard of the term tongue tie
Yeah.
before this? Okay. So did you
But
suspect that was what was happening?
no.
Okay.
Because while I had heard of the term tongue tie, I didn't know what it meant practically.
I started the Milk Making Minutes because I'm passionate about supporting breastfeeding people. But more importantly, I knew that hearing real people tell real stories would benefit both the storytellers and the listeners. I had this idea for 3 years before I launched. I asked so many people how I should begin, and Anchor came up repeatedly as the easiest way to launch a podcast. And I have not been disappointed. If you are passionate about a topic and have wanted to start a podcast, you can use Anchor to record and distribute your podcast. It's easy to use. You can use the editing tools right from the platform. You can distribute your podcast episodes seamlessly to listening platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts right from Anchor. And the best part is, it's free. And the tech support has been great too. Go to anchor.fm or download the app right to your phone to get started on your great podcast idea. I asked Elyse who diagnosed the tongue tie, and this led us to an important conversation about the important role that lactation specialists play when you and your baby are struggling with breastfeeding.
I had finally gotten into the breastfeeding consultant, and she's the one that had said, this is what's happening.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to know, I don't know if you've ever asked Will this, but even pediatricians don't really receive education on breastfeeding in med school.
Oh, they don't. And even general practitioners don't. Will was like, I wish I knew this.
Right. And that's why it's important to seek out. Now, when you're in a state where there's not a lot of options and there's wait lists, it's really hard. And there are, you can see people virtually, but it's not, you have to have the financial resources to do that because your insurance might not always pay for that. Now, sometimes now with COVID, it will, because
you have no other option.
Yeah, because you have no other option, and more things are covered virtually now under with insurance under COVID. But yeah, I tell people constantly, your pediatrician means well, but they might have received a 30-minute class on breastfeeding education in their medical school training. So unless they have sought out further training on their own, they are not guaranteed to be giving you best practice information. So, if you in your gut feel like, this doesn't sound right, or this doesn't feel right, it might not be right. And that's when you really do need to seek out a breastfeeding professional.
Right. And if it's taking 3 months, you as a parent know something's not right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so sorry that you had to wait that long. And especially with a 2-year-old at home, I can just imagine how horrible that was when you're in the thick of it.
Luckily, at that point in time, I had my mom and my dad and that cousin that I remember being born. She was in between jobs at the moment and was able to help nanny some. So had hands to be there and be helpful.
Yeah, you have hands. If those hands aren't fully supportive to help you breastfeed and do whatever it takes to breastfeed, it's helpful. But if they're saying, why don't you just feed the bottle? Do you want me to make you a bottle? Do you want me to mix up this formula? I can go get you some formula. Those things are helpful if that's what you want. But if that's not what you want, and so if we have people who are telling us, just get over it, you have a healthy baby, there are other ways to feed your baby. Yes, there are. And I'm thankful for that. But we also have to acknowledge the lost experience and how hard and painful it is when we lose that experience.
Oh, that hit me hard. I couldn't agree more with that. my mom would come over and she would be helpful hands. She would always offer, can I get you another bottle? Or can I get you a bottle? She needs to eat. But I wanted to breastfeed her because I had been so successful with Dean. And it was so frustrating because I had such that bonding experience with him. And even putting him down to sleep and all of it was just such this peaceful, fantastic time period. And with Amelia, Dean did not want to be put down. Like he was like that attachment parenting style. That was Dean. Like it was gentle. It was all of it. He just wanted to be held. I couldn't vacuum unless I could not put him down to do any of the things. He had to be bundled up on me. Amelia, she did not want to be held. She wanted to be wrapped up and then just set down and leave me alone.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to breastfeed her because I felt like I was not going to be able to bond with her.
Right.
Like I was so scared that if I'm not able to do this and she just wants to be left alone and not cuddled at all, like, is all this going to set my child up to be a psychopath?
Yeah,
like,
those are the places your mind goes when you're in those postpartum months. Right. And now that you were not setting, or you were still doing as good of a job that second time as the first. But those are the places your mind goes.
And now, especially because it's summer, and we have the time for her to do so. But now in the morning, she comes down the stairs and she crawls into my bed and she crawls under the covers and she cuddles, no, my mommy. And she wants nowhere to be but on my lap and right up next to me. And if she could crawl up my butt, she would. She wants to be right next to mommy all the time. And I make it my business to every chance I get to tell her that she is my most favoriteest girl in the world. And she cuddles in closer. And now we have a fantastic bond where she wants just mommy Amelia time. But in those first months, all I kept thinking of, if she turns into a psychopath later in life, this is the moment. These are the moments that all the quote unquote experts are going to point to. I turned her into this.
How awful for you to be dealing with that and then have nobody to really be able to express that to, because everybody was invalidating your experience.
Because everybody else was saying, you just have to get her fed. She'll be fine.
You have a master's in divinity, right?
Yeah.
Something similar?
Yeah, Masters of Arts in Religion.
Okay, Master of Arts in Religion. And you have had leadership roles in your
in everything.
Congregation. Yeah. So if you were to give a sermon to a group of people who might not understand the pain they could be causing breastfeeding mothers by being so dismissive of the heartache that they were experiencing, even if they ended up losing their breastfeeding experience and needed to formula feed, but they needed the support of their family and they needed somebody to say, we see you, we hear you, we understand how painful this is. What would you say, in that sermon?
My first thought are the verses of the woman being stoned and Jesus coming to her and saying, cast the first stone. And while it's not, those situations aren't that harsh as stoning someone else, it is Jesus asking someone to look inward first, out of your own eye, and examine yourself first before you approach someone else and tell them what to do. Because when you're talking to a breastfeeding mother or any mother for that matter, it doesn't matter whether it's breastfeeding or if it's how to change a diaper or if a child is throwing a tantrum. Before you go and talk to that mother and you open your mouth, that mom has heard all of the judgment that you're about to say without saying it. And doesn't matter the words coming out of your mouth, that mom hears the judgment in your voice. And that's not what she needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A friend of mine, we were at the park recently, and we both have, my kids are 8 and 4, and her kids are around the same age. And we saw a mom with, I think, 3 kids younger than us. One of them a teeny tiny baby. And one of her kids was having a really hard time, lots of crying, lots of tears, lots of tantrums. And we both said, we need to get a stack of $5 Starbucks gift cards. And just when we see moms struggling at the park like that, we just need to pass them out and say, you're doing a great job. And that's all that needs to be said. You're doing a great job. We know that this is tough. You're doing great. And we ended up saying to her, hey, we remember when our kids were that little. You're doing a great job. And she was like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like I'm doing a great job. I'm embarrassed, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, nope, you're doing awesome. You're managing lots of little emotions, and you're doing great. I really do think I'll go and get a stack of Starbucks gift cards. Just to, $5. Here, have a coffee.
That probably would have made me break down and bawl if somebody had done that to me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what I would have done for the rest of the day, except maybe go spend the $5 gift card.
I know, right? Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just think what people need to hear is you're doing a great job. They could really be struggling, even if they don't look like it, whether they've got a breast in a baby's mouth or a bottle, whatever it is, they could really be struggling. So what ended up happening once you got to see the IBCLC at 3.5 months?
Never latched.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, it was probably too late. She never really got the hang of it. We kept trying, though, and still ended up supplementing with formula because I couldn't stay tethered to a pump because of having a 2-year-old in the house.
Yeah.
So we finally just gave up trying to breastfeed. And 5.5, 6 months is when we finally called it.
So what was that like when you finally you said between 5 and 6 months?
Yeah, right around 6 months.
Right around 6 months, when you finally said, you know what, I've got to make a different decision for my own mental health because I can't be tethered to this pump. I'm assuming that's what it was. What was that like for you emotionally?
It was both relieving and depressing at the same time because it is that loss of how you wanted to treat your babies because you feel like you're not treating them right when you're doing it differently from how you envisioned because you feel like you spent all this time trying to make the right decision, and once you feel you've made that right decision, then you're doing the absolute best you know how to do for your child. And when everything falls apart on you, then you failed your child and you're not doing what's best.
Yeah. And I always remind people that the reason breastfeeding is so hard in our country is it's never a personal failure. It's never a personal failure. It's always the result of wide-stemming systemic failures that are failing all of us. And this is a perfect example of that.
I remember watching a lot of Call the Midwife and crying a lot because I felt like they had more support then than I have now.
Yeah.
And just bawling.
Absolutely. Yeah. To not even be able to get an appointment with the lactation specialist from the time the nurses in the hospital were like, well, you got to feed formula from a bottle. And you have a family doctor as a husband, and you are well researched. But still, when you're in those early postpartum days and you're trying to feed your baby and make the right decisions, you need to have supportive breastfeeding specialists, you know, by your side. Even I was already a lactation professional when I had my second, and I still called a lactation professional to my house 3 or 4 times with my second, because you need somebody else who's outside of your situation to help. So, you know, it just goes to show how much harder it is for somebody without our resources.
It really is. And because I can just say, most of the time, I can just say my last name because, you know, it's Will's last name, and doors open for us in this hospital system because he's an attending. And I can't imagine, you know, what it's like for somebody to not have that. It's frustrating for me, you know, when things don't happen, and I have it easy in this medical community.
Right. Well, Elyse, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy summer to talk with me. This has been amazing.
Thank you. It's so good to talk to you.
Elise's story reminded me how important it is to know who your lactation supporters are before giving birth. Many of us, including myself, offer prenatal visits that will help set you up to feel confident as you are making baby feeding decisions before your baby comes. Then you already know who you will call the moment your gut is telling you something isn't right. You can find my information at www.quabbinbirthservices.com. The spelling is in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Milk Making Minutes. If you have not done so already, please stop. Take 10 seconds to hit the 5 stars button on your favorite podcasting app. If you can take an extra 2 minutes more and write a review, I will be so happy. Thanks.